morning and welcome to Hudson Institute's panel on the plight of Pakistan's Hindu minority. I'm Aparna Pande, Director of the Initiative on the Future of India and South Asia. Hindus comprise approximately 2% of Pakistan's 220 million population, and they live primarily in the southern province of Sindh, which for centuries has been a religious melting pot. In recent years, however, reports by civil society organizations, international human rights groups, and even the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan have documented a rise in the forced conversion of Hindus in Pakistan, especially by targeting young Hindu girls through forced marriages and kidnappings. To discuss this issue in further detail and its backdrop and find potential policy options, we have with us today an excellent panel. Daud Khattak is the managing editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties, Radio Mashal. Daud has recently published a report titled Inside Pakistan's Conversion Factory for Hindu Brides, which we will discuss today. Nina Shea is Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at Hudson Institute. She previously served 7 terms as a commissioner on the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. Farahnaz Ispahani is Global Fellow at Woodrow Wilson Center and Senior Fellow, Religious Freedom Institute. She's also the author of Purifying the Land of the Pure, Pakistan's Religious Minorities. Deepali Kulkarni is at the Hindu American Foundation. I will now request Daud Khattak to provide us with a brief summary of the key highlights of his report. Daud.
Thank you, Dr. Pande, and it's a pleasure to be part of such a wonderful panel on the issue of forced conversion. I traveled in Sindh province in September 2020 to explore the issue of forced conversion of Hindu girls. When I say forced, that means quote unquote forced. I visited Sakhar, Ghotki, Badin, Mirpur, and Tharparkar districts, from where most of the cases are reported. And I met the converted girls, the families, the clerics who convert, elected representatives from Sindh province, and the ruling Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf MPs, rights activists and journalists, and the local authorities. 3 major hubs that we call in our report as conversion factories are involved in the whole affair. And these hubs are run by powerful individuals and families. Powerful in a sense that they are enjoying both religious influence and political clout. We can go into that details maybe later. But first, let me come to my findings. I did not come across, let me make it very clear, I did not come across any case of what is called conversion at gunpoint. That is the only category that the Pakistani authorities are calling as forced. Otherwise, the rest of the conversion are called as exploitation. And the word exploitation, quote unquote, again, that was used in a last year report of a committee that was assigned to visit these districts and report on the forced conversion of Hindu girls. In this report, we try to explain and highlight that what is forced and how it happens. The families have one version, and the clerics who are converting the girls, they have another version. Very briefly, if I say, the families are saying that their girl was kidnapped and that the girl was underage and that the police is not helping them. Then when I went to the clerics and I spoke to them, and they said that all these girls are converting with their own free will. And they are saying one very common story that is like a film story, that the girls are falling in love and most of the time with Muslim men. And most of the time these men have wives and also children. Like I met one husband of Ravina. That was a very prominent case in March 2019, Reena and Ravina. And her husband, Safdar Ali, he was already a father of 6 children. And Ravina fell in love with him, and then she came to Dargah Barchundi Sharif, where she accepted Islam, converted to Islam, and the same day She was married off, and the next day she sought protection from her family. So that is the modus operandi of all these things, that she is seeking protection from her own family, and all the doors are closed for the families. So that is the love story. And who are the victims? As I said, the younger Hindu girls, particularly from the poor family backgrounds. You will find in the register, in the log books of the clerics, very few Hindu girls who are of older age, and also very few men. And rarely you will find a Hindu man who converted to Islam and he is married off to a Muslim girl or a Muslim woman. As I said, who is involved? These are the clerics who are involved, and they have political clout and religious influence in those areas. What is the state role? In my finding, I can say that the state is not involved in religious conversions, but the bad thing is that the state is silent. They are not taking action for that, because conversion is something that should be, as I spoke to human rights activists, and they told me that should be a state business. That should be the business of, and should not be the business of an individual or a family or a group of individuals or a hub that I call a factory. Media. That is interesting. When I was searching for this project, so I was finding some very good cases to go after them. And most of the news that was coming in front of me, that was from the Indian media. So in Pakistan, it is reported, and thanks to the social media, particularly Twitter, that the issue is now being highlighted. But I think in Pakistan, these poverty-stricken areas and backward areas are not the priority of the 24/7 TV channels, because from there they cannot generate any kind of business, I can say. So in newspapers, sometimes these issues are covered, but most of the time it is covered in the Indian media. But the bad thing was that I found was that sometimes the Indian media stories were cooked, and sometimes they were like, the information was not correct. Sometimes they were reporting on the basis of third and fourth person these stories. And that is the case, I think you know very well, that is the case in Pakistan and India. The Pakistani media is highlighting the plight, the so-called plight of Muslims in India, and the Indian media is highlighting. So this is the two countries' politics that is happening in all these things. Key questions. That is the last part of my briefing, so I can give you a chance to speak. Key question. There is no definition of forced so far, and that is the rights groups are raising these questions. Let us define the word forced. And the rights activist, Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, they told me that this should be criminalized if it is the case, like as it is reported. There is no legislation, particularly about the age of conversion. Pakistani parliamentarians and the government in Sindh province tried 2 times, but then they backed out under pressure from the clerics, from the same clerics who are converting these people, plus more clerics. Yes. Government elected representatives, they are also silent, and they are silent for some reasons. Once, this is the Hindus are living there, but these districts are the Muslim majority population there. So if they speak, they are fearing the loss of their vote bank, and also they are fearing a kind of religious backlash. We have seen the case of Salman Taseer in 2011, and right now, when we are talking here, only a few days ago, we have seen what is happening and what was happening in Lahore, or what was happening in the street in Islamabad and Rawalpindi. So they are fearing this kind of reaction from these people. Even the state capitulated in front of them. Individuals and hubs who are converting these people and issuing conversion, they are issuing conversion certificates, and they are keeping their regular logbooks, and they are keeping their registers, and they are keeping the photos of the people. So this means that something is very systematic going on, and something serious is going on, but there is no notice from the governments or from the state side. And we don't know what is the legal status of all these certificates, which are sometimes presented in the courts, even in the litigations, when the girls' families are approaching the courts and these certificates are presented. They are writing their ages as 21 years or 18 years or 23 years, and the families are saying that they were 14 years, 15 years. So that is the case. And then why not the state, and why the hubs, families, and individuals? These are also the question. Why no age for conversion? That was the key question from Hindu representatives. They were saying that they told me that in Pakistan we have an age limit for making a driving license. We have an age limit for making a national identity card. And we have an age limit for voter registration. So if there is an age limit for all these things, and this is pretty strong argument from the Hindu representatives, so then why not an age limit for such a serious matter? So these are my findings. These are my questions. I think we can go ahead with the rest of your questions, or my other colleagues if they have. Yep.
Thank you so much, Daud. That was excellent. What I will now request is I'll ask the other panelists to offer their comments. I'd asked everybody to look at Daud's report. I will start with Ms. Ispahani, if you could offer your comments, because you've written extensively on this issue as well. And then I will ask Ms. Kulkarni and then Ms. Shea. Ms. Ispahani.
Thank you, Dr. Pande. I'd just like to start by mentioning that I was a member of parliament in Pakistan and a member of the Human Rights Committee. And I served at the same time as Mia Mittu, Mia Mitta, the main person we're talking about, who runs the major hub for the conversion, forced conversion of young Hindu girls in Sindh. So I know of this man, and we knew about what he was doing in his family shrine back in 2007 and 2008. Yet he was an elected representative to the National Assembly of Pakistan. So I just like to put this out there so you understand how powerful these people can be. And with families that are as poor as most of these families are in Sindh, because most of the richer families have fled, have left, you can really understand what kind of environment we're going into. So I'd like to say to Mr. Khattak, let me begin by saying this is a timely report on an important issue, one that many of us in Pakistan, those concerned with Pakistan, have been working on for a very long time. But to give you a regional perspective, the last decade or more has seen a rise in majoritarian communalism across large parts of the world, especially South Asia, home to almost 2 billion people, representatives of every major and minor religious belief. The rise in religious extremism, often supported by the state's apparatus, it is often supported by the state apparatus in the subcontinent, is worrying. In Pakistan, the situation for the country's minorities has become progressively bleaker. Since the focus of this report is the forced conversion of Hindu girls, that's why today I'm going to focus my remarks about that particular question. But that should not let anyone get away with claiming that this is the only major problem for religious minorities in the subcontinent or even in Pakistan. And we must not forget that whereas in Sindh province, you see young and underage Hindu girls being forcibly converted, in Punjab province, you see young Christian girls being forcibly converted, and we must not forget them. This issue also must not be seen from a nationalistic perspective, with Indians criticizing Pakistan or Pakistanis defending the indefensible. We need to acknowledge that the rise of communal majoritarianism has led to the persecution of Christian and Muslim minorities in India, the Hindu and Buddhist minorities in Bangladesh, the Christian, Hindu, and Muslim minorities in Sri Lanka, and the Hindu, Ahmadi, and Christian minorities in Pakistan, leaving them all feeling embattled. Inside Pakistan's conversion factory for Hindu brides, this new report sheds light on how poor lower caste Hindus in Sindh have been targets for forced conversion, and the numbers are growing. Powerful people like the influential hereditary spiritual leader of the shrine of Bharchundi Sharif, Mia Mitta or Mia Mittu as he's also called, have made the conversion of underage Hindu girls and their marriage to older Muslim men into a political cause. They celebrate it as a history, apologize. They've celebrated as a victory for the Muslim faith in the local community. It helps Mia Mittu garner votes from Muslim followers and supporters. Bharchundi is one of 3 major hubs, as the report says, in Sindh province for converting religious minorities to Islam, but it is the most infamous in both its single-minded focus on the forced conversion and marriage of underage or young Hindu girls and women to, in many cases, older Muslim men, and often, interestingly, overnight. Hindus account for approximately 2 million of Pakistan's 220 million population. Most live in Sindh, though there are pockets of Hindus also in Balochistan province. It is estimated that 1,000 girls each year are forcibly converted and married, most of whom are Hindu. The report points out how girls and young women vanish from their homes, marrying and converting virtually overnight, and are kept away from their families. Human rights lawyer Sulema Jahangir points out that while there are a large number of cases of forced conversions and marriages, there are also cases where vulnerable young women are preyed upon by influential men who entice them to convert and marry. So to what extent can the law differentiate coercion from peaceful persuasion? And could enticement without the threat of violence become punishable? Moreover, why is it that largely underage girls who are converting, not only should underage marriage be a cause of concern, but Pakistan's law needs to protect the weak and the vulnerable. It should stop those who exploit their positions of power to entice vulnerable people or subordinates to convert. But I think it's highly unlikely, since I pointed out people like Mia Mitta end up in the national parliament. A vast majority of the girls are minors, with numerous cases of girls as young as 12 years old. In most cases, families alleged abduction of their daughters. Pakistan's religious political parties oppose a minimum age for conversion or marriage, claiming that this restriction is not allowed by Islam. Sindh province, however, has outlawed the marriage of girls under 18, but now often underage Hindu girls are being taken to the Punjab province in some cases where they are married. Sexual intercourse with a girl below the age of 16 is statutory rape and carries a death sentence or a minimum sentence of 10 years imprisonment. But still, the production of a conversion certificate and a nikah-nama or document affirming an Islamic marriage influences law enforcement to pardon the abductors. The Sindh government has twice attempted to outlaw forced conversions and marriages. The Protection of Minorities Bill laid out guidelines for the court process in cases of underage converts and placed an age limit of 18 years for conversions. In 2016, the bill was unanimously passed by the Sindh Assembly. Religious parties, however, objected to an age limit for conversions and threatened to besiege the assembly if the bill received the approval of the governor. The governor, a federal government appointee, refused to sign the bill into law. The nightmare for Sindh's Hindu population of their underage girls being kidnapped and married after conversion continues. And now I'd like to stress a slightly different point. Once these young women convert, be they Hindu or Christian, there is no going back, as apostasy would mean a death sentence. In many cases, women are also told that their family are unbelievers, kafirs, and they cannot meet them. So in all, this report tells the story of these women wrenched from their families and who have little access to justice and are stuck in the clutches of powerful men without any support from the state machinery. Thank you, Dr. Pande.
Thank you, Mrs. Ispahani. Ms. Kulkarni, if you could express some thoughts and comments on the report.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Mr. Khan and the Hudson Institute, as well as my fellow panelists, for bringing a much needed awareness to this tragic and persistent problem. Before I start, I want to wonder aloud about the situation if conversion was taken completely out of the picture. So if Muslim girls in Pakistan were abducted, married off to older men, and then not permitted to see their families, despite the family's public pleas and desperate begging to be able to see their girls, would the Pakistan government remain silent? And the answer is, of course, that they wouldn't. Similarly, if this happened to an American girl, and European American or white girl was taken from her home, married off to an older man, not permitted to see her family, raped, because of course children cannot consent to sex, and was constantly being intimidated, and her family was being intimidated by her abductors, would this be acceptable to the United States or to the international community? And the answer there again is, of course not. So I believe the Muslim clerics that are perpetrating these acts of violence would like to paint this in terms of an issue of conversion. Because if we think about it in terms of conversion, then we don't have to think about it in terms of human trafficking, which is what it is. And so I understand why Mr. Khan's wonderfully done article illustrates these acts of violence in terms of conversion, because that's precisely what these clerics are doing. But by any international measure, the transportation of children, their subsequent underage marriage without their parents' consent, rape, and separation from families is human trafficking. The perpetrators, of course, postulate that these girls are over 18, and then additionally state that they won't accept the laws prohibiting underage marriage. This is, of course, logically incoherent. Moreover, as the report notes, many girls, including Reena and Ravina, were taken to Punjab province, where the legal age to marry is 16, which would not be necessary if they were 18 years of age. The fact of the matter is that the clerics have no birth records, nor do they attempt to provide any documentation of the exact ages of these individuals. And therefore, they cannot prove that they are 18 or older. The onus is on the clerics to prove the age of the children. The onus is, of course, not on the children, and there is no responsibility on behalf of the children to prove their age. Saying if a young child says that they're an adult, it does not make it so. The parents of Reena and Ravina state that they are 14 and 15 respectively, and in the absence of birth records proving otherwise, although their brother did file for a B form, which would have proved their correct age, the parents' knowledge of their children's age is the only authority for the age of the children. The clerics can have no knowledge of the age of the children because they are not part of the community, they are not related to these children. They can have no understanding, and they attempt to present no documentation or understanding of the age of these young girls. So, the records of Mia and Mitha illustrate this fact, including the approximate ages and not the birth dates or any documentation supporting the same, means that Mia and Mitha does not know the ages of these girls, stating, and he has, stated boldly that he would like anybody to provide proof that he has forcefully converted girls. But really, the state should be questioning his records and asking him to provide proof that any of these girls were 18 or older. So despite the obvious fact that these girls are underage, Pakistan allows these forced underage marriages and actively participates in keeping girls separated from their families, which makes the Pakistani government in the end complicit in this manifold violence against religious minority girls and their communities. I'd just like to also briefly note that there are numerous UN reports, issue papers, declarations, and even a protocol addressing human trafficking. And most, if not all of these documents make two things clear. The first is that actions such as transporting children is human trafficking. Children cannot consent. And the second is that children cannot be consent to anything, including marriage and to sex. These underage marriages are necessarily illegitimate. Children are any person under 18 years of age. That's the international standard, as well as the standard in Sindh, where a majority of these girls are being targeted. So there's a UN issue paper on the interlinkages between trafficking in persons and marriage, and it discusses underage marriage, even with parent consent, as human trafficking. So if even underage marriage with parent consent is human trafficking, then underage marriage where the parents certainly do not consent would also qualify as human trafficking. And as Mr. Khan noted, conversion is not an issue with Muslim, it's not an overwhelmingly common issue that a Muslim woman is marrying a Hindu man and then converting to Hinduism, or a Muslim woman is marrying a Hindu man and converting the man to Islam, or that Hindu women are converting Muslim men to Hinduism. There's only the instance of older Muslim men preying on younger Hindu girls, and that illustrates the fact, and in all of the UN reports and papers on human trafficking, this is a very common kind of theme that you'll see, is that older men preying on younger girls. And if they were of the same age, or if they were of age, they were 18 years older, this would not be an issue. But painting this as an issue of conversion obfuscates the fact that it's actually an issue of preying on Hindu girls, abducting them, forcing them to marry, forcing them to have sex, which is rape, and preventing them from seeing their families. So this many-fold violence, and as Mrs. Ispahani noted, they also won't, if they do, have interest in converting back to Hinduism, then that is putting them at risk of, apostasy, and therefore being, killed and other forms of violence. So the train of violence really never stops. Once it starts, it keeps going, and it is something that I think these Muslim clerics have a lot of confidence in at this point.
Thank you. Ms. Shea, your thoughts on the report, and then we move to the next question.
Yes, thank you. I also want to congratulate Daud Khan for doing this important article. It's an important reminder of the fact that these cases are still occurring. There have been denials that this is a real problem, and they're from other commentators, and also from the governments, the local governments and courts in Pakistan, that this is not a forced event. These are not forced events. These both abductions of the girls and the conversions. It's a two-part problem. And for pointing out that there is an ideological motive behind these. So this is not simply about sex or exploitation or money. It's also has the purpose of eliminating minorities in Pakistan, to make it a non-pluralistic society, to make it a homogenous society under Islam. So I think it's very important to have this investigation, these facts before us. And I agree with my distinguished fellow panelists in everything that has been said. I will say that as a former commissioner on the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, we started designating Pakistan as a country of particular concern. We recommended the State Department designate Pakistan as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act. That is the list of some of the world's worst persecutors of religious freedom. And we did it because of the treatment of non-Muslim minorities in Pakistan, particularly under the blasphemy law, but also mentioning the fact that these girls and women are persistent. There are persistent reports of their being abducted for the purpose of marriage and conversion to Islam. And this affects the Hindu women. It also affects the Christian women and other minorities as well. Some of the Sikhs, the Ahmadiyya, the Shea. So it's a function of both the poverty of these minorities, which is a result itself of discrimination and marginalization. So they are weak and vulnerable. They are the targets, and the intolerance in the society. That said, the United States has its own issues of racism that has haunted this country. And we did not wait for the culture to change before we adopted and implemented civil rights amendments. The law must precede, cannot wait for the culture. And so there are plenty of examples where the girls are clearly underage, and they're occurring at this moment. In fact, there's a new case in Pakistan this month, of Maria Shahbaz, in age 14 from Punjab. The Aid to the Church in Need has been trying to defend her there. She was abducted at gunpoint by several men. She was forcibly married and converted in a very similar pattern to what Daud Khan describes in his article. The family took the case to the High Court of Lahore, and that court decided that it was a voluntary marriage. So the family lost. Maria eventually just escaped, and she attested that she did not convert to Islam, that she remained steadfast in her Catholic faith. She took her husband to court. He did not show last fall. He did not show in court. She was trying to get an annulment from that. But meanwhile, the family is being forced to flee Pakistan because she's considered an apostate at this point, apostate from Islam, which carries a death penalty. And we've seen the blasphemy, apostasy retributions can be by the mob on the street as well as the courts. And so she and her family are in immediate danger. And the Aid to the Church in Need has petitioned this month for her asylum in the United Kingdom. So their lives are ruined, even though she, had a happy ending in the sense that she escaped from this enslavement. So this is ongoing as we talk, and the government is, yes, silent, and but it's worse than that. It's acting with impunity, you might say. That's the reason why USERF has recommended, and why the State Department eventually has named Pakistan to CPC, because it is by being silent, actively not deciding not to enforce laws. There are about 14 or 15 crimes that I've identified that go along with this phenomenon of abduction of girls and women, and for marriage, involuntary marriage, forced marriage, and forced conversion of their religion. There's abduction itself, which is a crime, kidnapping, there's torture, rape, death threats, potential genocide. I mean, this is a characteristic of genocide in many other cases. We've seen recently the Armenian genocide. It was a frequent occurrence there. But in ISIS situation, Farah and I have written about that in Nineveh in 2014, where about 6,000 Yazidi girls and women were taken into forced marriages. Then there's, and which was then declared a genocidal situation by the administration in the United States, as well as Congress. There's the crime of enslavement, there's human trafficking, as Deepali mentioned. There's denial of religious freedom, the freedom to marry and found a family. This is part of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Pakistan is a party. There's violations of liberty and security of the person, the right to educate your children in your religious beliefs. It's another provision. Freedom from slavery or servitude is another right under international law. And then, of course, equal protection of the law, regardless of against discrimination on the basis of sex. So these are all different counts in against what is happening against these perpetrators of these abductions and forced marriages. And there is a weak rule of law, as Daud Khan has pointed out. There is lack of documents, legal documents showing the age of these girls, the inadequacy of the police investigations, where there is either no investigation or just taking the word of the cleric, the process in the hands of the cleric, not in the hands of the law. So I'm a human rights lawyer by profession, and that's been my career and for many decades. So I just thought it would be important to underscore that this really is a legal issue as much as a cultural issue. And rather waiting for a cultural change in Pakistan, the elected officials and the courts need to start ensuring that Pakistan is a rule of law country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you. So I have around 20 minutes left, and what I will do is I will combine my two questions and then give everybody ample time to answer them both directly. My question is a little broader. It is one, sort of a number of you may mention that it's not just an issue of Pakistan's Hindu minorities or the issue of forced conversion. There's a broader issue of Pakistan's religious minorities, both Muslim, but even both non-Muslim, but even Muslim, Shia and Ahmadis. And so why is this? Why is it that we are discussing the issue of Pakistan's sort of religious minorities? What is the background to why Pakistan's religious minorities have faced these challenges? And as Nina mentioned, why Pakistan has often been recommended to be a country of particular concern by the USCIRF and State Department for a number of years now. It's not recently. And in that context, I would ask each one of you to also, sort of give me one or two policy recommendations that you have either suggested, as a USCIRF commissioner, as a former parliamentarian, as an investigative journalist who has covered so much, and as somebody who works as a policy advocate. What are some of the recommendations you would give? Nina mentioned one, that you have to start with the law. You can't wait for culture and society to change. But are there any specific recommendations that each one of you would suggest? So I will start in the order of Ms. Ispahani, Mr. Khan, Ms. Kulkarni, and then I will end with Ms. Shea. Ms. Ispahani.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pande. Looking at the bigger picture, what is the history and reason behind what we are facing today and what really religious minorities have faced since the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947? It's important to understand that, to understand where we are today. As you know, Pakistan, as originally envisaged, would have had a quarter of its population as non-Muslim. And I strongly believe if we had had a comfortable 23 or 25% of non-Muslims in Pakistan, this kind of culture, framework, this kind of extreme Islamist ideological framework we're looking at in many ways, I don't think would have existed. So this whole culture of majoritarianism would have been different. But look, going back to the partition of India and Pakistan, the violent ethnic cleansing during partition in 47 meant that very few Muslims were left in Indian Punjab and virtually no significant Hindu or Sikh populations were left in Pakistani Punjab. So instead of that 20 to 25% non-Muslim population I talked about, Pakistan's current religious minority population is around 3%. Some figures quote a little higher, some a little lower, but according to my research. And this also includes Ahmadi Muslims who consider themselves Muslims but have been cast out of Islam, outside the pale of Islam by law, which, as Nina pointed out, was so important, and a constitutional amendment. Moreover, Pakistan's self-view of itself as an Islamic state has also eroded tolerance for religious pluralism. The objectives resolution passed by Pakistan's Constituent Assembly in 1949 defined Pakistan as an Islamic, not a secular state. Debates such as the one about Ahmadis that led to the constitution defining who is a Muslim and about whether non-Muslims could be allowed to be part of the same electorate as Muslims followed. So here you already have a situation where people who are not Muslims are less than other citizens who are Muslim. General Zia-ul-Haq's Islamization and the jihadi militancy that began in the 80s further limited tolerance for religious minorities. Today, all political parties, and I say all, pander to religious and sectarian parties for votes, while the all-powerful military sees Islamist militants as allies in pursuit of national security objectives. The economically well-off Christians, Parsis, and Ahmadis who I grew up with in Pakistan have relocated to the West or anywhere that they could find a new home in. And so that leaves mainly poor Christians, powerless Ahmadis, and impoverished Hindus in the country. With no protection from the state machinery, the minorities face numerous threats from Islamist groups. Lately, terrorist violence has diminished in terms of attacks on churches, in terms of burning Hindu temples, in terms of perhaps some fewer lynchings and events of that kind. But threats to minorities still persist. So all these laws relating to the rights of religious minorities are discriminatory, from our electoral laws in Pakistan, family laws, laws on evidence, hudud laws, the redistribution of income through zakat and ushr, trust and evacuee property laws, domicile and nationality. And the worst threat to minorities, as Nina has mentioned earlier, is posed by Pakistan's blasphemy laws, which are among the most draconian in the world. In fact, I think Iran and Pakistan do have the worst blasphemy laws. The mere accusation of blasphemy becomes a de facto death sentence in Pakistan. A mob might kill the accused before trial. Lawyers defending a blasphemy accused have been killed, as have judges who are granted bail to an accused. And even powerful people like politicians. Two of my former colleagues, Governor Salman Taseer, who was a Muslim, and Federal Minorities Minister Clement Shahbaz Bhatti, who was a Catholic Christian, were both killed, standing up and asking for a repeal or an end to Pakistan's blasphemy laws, and also for the release of Asia Bibi. So I leave you there with this background in terms of that. Now, you'd also asked about policy, Dr. Pande. So I want to say that protecting religious minorities is not the priority of any political party in Pakistan, and is not one for the permanent state establishment either. Every now and then, some steps are taken to try and temper international criticism. So from my point of view, very frankly, these are token gestures. Yes, those of us who work in religious freedom and human rights believe strongly that every life of every persecuted minority, religious or ethnic, is precious. But we have a case, for example, of Asia Bibi finally being released and allowed to go into exile in Canada. Some high-profile Ahmadi is released quietly. So you have a few of these cases. In my time in Parliament, it was a young Christian girl called Rimsha Masi, who was quietly taken out of the country. But there's no serious effort to change the laws or public attitudes. The international community names and shames countries that mistreat religious minorities, as Nina championed at her time at USERF. But sometimes I feel that's not enough for countries that choose to be immune to criticism. Perhaps there needs to be a system of sanctions against all perpetrators of religious discrimination and mistreatment of religious minorities. I think as a Pakistani American and a proud American as well, I do believe among President Biden's human rights working initiatives, religious freedom for people, persecuted minorities all over the world has to be at the forefront of the mission of his administration. So the system of sanctions, whether it's China conducting genocide against Uyghurs, or Myanmar oppressing Rohingya Muslims, or the forced conversion of Hindus we have been talking about, we have to get to a place where all of these recommendations by groups like USERF and individual practitioners like myself and many other groups, and including Daud's excellent report, there has to be some spine put in, some bones, a mechanism put in behind the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes the right of everyone to religious freedom. But there's no international mechanism to ensure its implementation. And that would be my policy recommendation. I believe we need to keep working on creating a global regime to protect religious minorities or people of all faiths and none everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Khan.
Thank you, and let me say thanks to Ms. Ispahani and Ms. Kulkarni and Ms. Shea for their nice comments about the report. So I think we are also getting the time warning, so I will be rushing to the conclusion and the recommendations. I would say two things. No going back. I asked the Miyameta when we were sitting together, and his interesting comments was that we allow them to go back to their families, but if they go back to their old religion, the doors are closed. These are his words. So the doors are closed. They cannot go to their families, and these girls cannot go to their even to their religion. And then there is the age issue. I think there is very poor birth record in all over Pakistan, but in Sindh province, and particularly in the rural Sindh, I did not found anything like about the birth record. Parents are just ending up at schools and they are telling the teachers that his date of birth is 30th of June, and this 8 year. If you find, you will find a lot of people with 30th of June date of birth. So that is like just a guessing game. And that is the problem. The bill, I asked one of the clerics that the government tried to introduce a bill about the age limit. And he was very bravely and he was very boldly telling me that, well, in a country which was founded in the name of Islam, we are not going to allow such a bill to be like brought. And then they quoted some example from the Islamic history that this and that person was converted, brought Islam at the age of this and this. So they have their reasons for that. Now, going back to the minorities, I would say that it's not only the Hindu minorities. I also did a report in 2018 on the tiny Kailash minority living in the Himalayas in Chhatral. And my 90-minute documentary is also coming out on that. So they are just 4,000 in population, and they are converting. The girls are being married in the cities, and the families they are just lamenting. They cannot do anything. They are just like this. If we say that only the minorities, it's not only the minorities and Hindus. Muslims are also getting such kind of treatment. Only in early April, one of these clerics who are involved in these conversions, he announced a bounty on the head of Sindhi writer Amr Jalil, because he said something during a literary conference, and then they said that he must be killed. So that is the situation. A student, Mashal Khan, in northwestern Pakistan, he was lynched by his fellow students. And later the court proved that the charges were like baseless. And apart from that, we have Salman Taseer in front of us. That is happening. And then some recent incidents. History. These clerics are, I won't go into the history, I won't add up anything what Ms. Ispahani mentioned to save some time. That's all for me. But the history of conversion, I would say that they date back the history of conversion to a cleric, to a religious scholar, Maulana Ubaidullah Sindhi. And they are claiming that his name was Bhuta Singh, and he converted at Dargah Barchundi Sharif in late 19th century. I think conversion was not a big issue till 2012 in Sindh province. It was the case of Wrinkle Kumari, who was named as Faryal Shah, that brought everything to the surface. If you go back into the Sindh province, you will find that people are like mentioning the stories of these conversions. For example, the mother of one of the Sindh's former chief minister, she was a Hindu convert. So, but now this issue has become like pretty systematic, and there is like a kind of organized campaign to convert these poor Hindu girls and marry them to the Muslim boys. It is not but the alarm bells are raised for two reasons here. One is the issue is getting more coverage in media due to the social media now. Before that, it was not getting that much coverage in the media. And the second is the way of conversion is changed, and it has been turned into an organized campaign by the hubs to keep and increase their religious influence and political clout, which is also a tool of blackmail against the government and against the minorities, like grabbing lands and all these things. Reasons, I will quickly go into the reason. The first and foremost is that minorities are not the priority of the governments in Pakistan. They have many other issues, right? The priority issues are laying somewhere else for the governments. Other political parties are also silent. Apart from the government in Sindh province, Pakistan People's Party, which is a liberal party, but they also backed out when they brought a law. But other political parties are also silent. They are not speaking on this issue in the assembly, outside the assemblies. State machinery such as police is not taking action. Again, that is for religious reasons, because they are fearing a kind of religious backlash. And I found these clerics who are involved in the conversion, they have some strange kind of stories. For example, they are saying that this or that police officers was involved in the conversion, that he took action against someone, and then they say that he faced the God wrath and this thing or that thing happened to him. So these are the very common stories. I think June 2014 Jelani judgment is the way forward to stop all this. The then Chief Justice Tasadduq Hussain Jelani, he took a suo motu notice of the Peshawar 2013 Peshawar church blast, and then he issued a recommendation. In that, he recommended that National Council for Minorities must be formed, taken notice of threats to Hindu churches and temples, and taken also notice to the threat to Kailash community, and special force to protect the minorities, and also curriculum, school curriculum and coverage in the media. And 7 years gone, that judgment is not implemented in Pakistan so far. Apart from that, very briefly, there must be legislation on conversion, as Ms. Kulkarni, I think she pointed out, there is no legislation right now. There must be proper birth record to be presented in case of underage marriages. That is not there. And state machinery must not discriminate on the basis of someone's religion, and must not come under pressure because of someone's political clout or someone's religious influence. I think these are very briefly in this time, I can say this much.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Ms. Kulkarni.
Yeah, so there's a lot to discuss here, but I'll try my best to keep my comments brief. As Mrs. Ispahani noted, the partition in 1947 was very significant for Pakistan and India and as well, and its conception of the country. And I would also like to add that the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, which included a simultaneous genocide of Hindus in particular on behalf of the Pakistan army, was the second partition, which kind of reiterated Pakistan's conception of itself as a country devoid of Hindus. And there is certainly a constitutional preference for Islam and religious identification laws institutionalizing the discrimination and second-class status of minorities. Coming back to the issue of conversion very briefly, I think it's important to note that this issue of conversion becomes relevant because it's an issue of these young girls being abducted and the clerics assuming and asserting that this is fine because that's marrying somebody as long as they've crossed puberty is acceptable under Muslim cultural norms and religious edicts as they understand them. And so through conversion, these clerics gloss over the very real realities of violence and human trafficking they are creating, and are making the rules for what the international community and what the minorities in Pakistan can speak about. And the Pakistani government's silence in the face of pleas from religious minorities makes it seem that they would like the intimidation and conversion of Hindus and Christians in Pakistan to continue. So as you know, we've been talking about, as Mr. Khan and others have noted, Pakistan is not invested in protecting its religious minorities. So, you know, the Sindh criminal law bill could have been passed in 2016, 2019. It did not move forward. There's public school textbooks have language promoting discrimination against religious minorities, particularly Hindus and Christians. And so these instances illustrate Pakistan's complicity in this violence. So because Pakistan is not invested in this, we need to push our lawmakers in the United States to express that investment in the human rights and the lives of these religious minorities in Pakistan. The US government has committed over $5 billion in civilian assistance to Pakistan and over $1 billion in emergency humanitarian response since 2009. And during Pakistan's 2019 to 2020 fiscal year, the US was again the top donor country to Pakistan. And so it's very important that through USAID, through USERF, through all of our mechanisms in the United States where we're supporting Pakistan through USAID and we are measuring Pakistan's human rights violations, that we're collectively working in the United States to raise this issue with the United States government, with decision makers to take action, because our tax dollars are going towards these human rights violations. So we have a right to speak up and we need to take action. So I'll end my comments there. I'm really interested to see what Ms. Shea would like to add.
Thank you. Ms. Shea.
Thank you very much. This is a Pakistan problem, but it's also an international problem. Religious freedom atrocities like this do have an effect on development and are affecting stability in the region, this kind of religious tension and acceleration of radicalization. And this is hidden, this is a problem that's hidden within the domestic context. As Mr. Khan has pointed out, these are poor, usually poor people that are marginalized, have very little voice within Pakistan. And the politicians and political parties are reticent about raising this or making this a cause because of the sensitivities of the religion issue and what has happened to Governor Salman Taseer and my friend Shahbaz Bhatti, whom I worked with when I was a commissioner on the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. So this has become an international problem, and we need more engagement by our governments in the West and the rest of the world. I am pleased that the all parties parliamentary group on Pakistan of the United Kingdom is currently accepting, is investigating the situation, is accepting evidence on this very issue of the forced abductions of the girls and women and coerced or forced marriages and conversion. So that will be an important report when that is issued. I also think the United States government, which is aware of the problem, has identified the problem, needs to take more action. And the Global Magnitsky Act should be reviewed and examined in this context for personal targeted, as well as some of the other suggestions Deepali and Farah have made this session. I think that the personalized sanctions for those involved in this atrocity, this pattern of atrocities, especially these conversion hubs that Mr. Khan has identified and written about, need to be applied. And that is visa and economic sanctions for the particular people involved. And that's, I'll conclude there, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Mr. Khan, Mrs. Ispahani, Ms. Kulkarni, and Ms. Shea for taking out time today from your busy schedules, and especially to Mr. Khan for his extensive investigative report on this particular subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.